Even now, nearly 5 decades after investigators first recovered human remains from John Wayne Gacy's property, 5 of his victims still have no confirmed names, and that is one of the quieter, more disturbing parts of the story. Most people think the case ended a long time ago. Gacy was convicted and later executed. The house in Norwood Park became part of the story people remembered, and the number tied to the case became familiar. At least 33 victims. But behind that number, some of the young men were still unknown. When Cook County reopened the identification effort in 2011, 8 victims remain unidentified. Over the next decade, 3 of them were identified: William George Bundy, James Haakenson, and Francis Wayne Alexander. That still left 5. They were recovered, examined, buried, exhumed, tested again, and still decades later, they remained only as numbers in case files. Some families got answers, even if those answers came in the worst possible way. But for others, the case stayed unfinished. Investigators had remains, but no name that took those remains back to a family or to the life that person had before the case. So the case was never fully closed. Because for the unidentified victims, the question was never just what happened to them. It was who they were before they were taken. The last of those 3 identifications came in 2021, when DNA helped identify Francis Wayne Alexander. But before his family learned the truth, they had spent decades believing he had simply gone away. That was the story his family had lived with. Francis Wayne Alexander was from North Carolina. He had left the state and eventually ended up in Chicago. By the mid-1970s, he was there, around 21 or 22 years old. To his family, the silence looked like distance. Maybe he had chosen to stay away. Maybe he had started again somewhere else. It was painful, but it was still possible. But that was where the truth was. On December 26, 1978, investigators were uncovering remains in Gacy's crawl space. One of the young men found there would later turn out to be Francis, but nobody knew that name yet. Later, investigators would place his death somewhere between early 1976 and early 1977. But his family did not have that timeline. They did not know when he died or where the trail had actually ended. In the records, nothing connected him back to North Carolina or to the family still carrying his name. He was one of the unknown victims, listed by a number because there was nothing else to call him. So for decades, the case was split in 2. His family had a name, but no answer. Investigators had remains, but no name. And the 2 sides stayed apart for more than 40 years. His identification in 2021 meant more than a new line in an old case file. It corrected the story his family had been carrying. Francis had not simply disappeared into another life. He had been found long ago, only no one knew it was him. But his name did not come back because someone suddenly remembered him. It came back because something from his remains still held enough information to lead investigators back to the family that had lost him. The problem was not that investigators had nothing to work with. They had remains, dental details, burial locations, and old reports from the search at the house. But for the unidentified victims, those details still did not lead back to a name. In the late 1970s, identification depended heavily on dental records. If records existed, and if the right family was already looking in the right direction, a name could sometimes be confirmed. But when that connection was missing, the remains could stay in the case for years without leading investigators back to who that person had been. So in 2011, Cook County reopened the identification effort. 8 victims were still unidentified then. The old work had gone as far as it could. Newer science gave investigators another way to look. The first name to come back was William George Bundy. The surname may sound familiar, but this was a different Bundy. William's story belonged to the Gacy case. He was a Chicago teenager, and he went missing in October 1976, around the time he turned 19. The night he disappeared, he was reportedly going to a party. He had forgotten his wallet at home. After that, he was not seen again. Later, a friend told investigators that Bill had a roll of money in his pocket and had said he was doing construction jobs for someone. It did not prove he had met Gacy, but in this case, a young man doing construction work for someone was not a detail investigators could ignore. For years, William had been known only as victim number 19 because he was the 19th victim recovered from the crawl space. After the renewed DNA effort began, his sister agreed to provide DNA. A childhood friend also contacted investigators because he had long wondered whether Bill might have crossed paths with Gacy. In November 2011, William George Bundy was identified. After more than 30 years, victim number 19 had a name again. The next confirmed name came years later. In July 2017, Cook County announced that another unnamed Gacy victim had been identified as James "Jimmy" Haakenson. Jimmy was 16 when he left his home in St. Paul, Minnesota, in the summer of 1976. His mother last heard from him on August 5 of that year. He called and told her he was in Chicago. After that call, there was nothing. His remains had been found in Gacy's crawl space on December 29, 1978. He had been buried with other victims, but like William, his name stayed separated from his remains for decades. DNA from his siblings helped investigators make the connection. Then they still had to check the records connected to him: missing person reports, social security information, and post-mortem records before they could say victim number 24 was Jimmy Haakenson. By 2017, the unknown list had changed twice. But Francis's case needed a different kind of work. Because his family believed he had gone away, no missing person report had been filed for him. There was no report waiting to connect Francis Alexander to an unidentified man in Gacy's crawl space. So investigators could not start with the kind of direct family lead that had helped in the earlier cases. They had to work outward from the remains. By 2019, the Cook County Sheriff's Office had begun working with the DNA Doe Project, a non-profit group that uses investigative genetic genealogy to identify unknown remains. This was not the same as comparing remains to a parent or sibling already waiting with a sample. It could begin with distant relatives, people who might not know that their DNA connected them to an unidentified man from a crawl space in Chicago. For Francis, the key was a molar tooth. A tooth can sometimes protect DNA better than other parts of the remains, and after so many years, that mattered. The sample was sent for DNA extraction, then for whole genome sequencing. After that, the genetic data had to be processed into a file for GED match. That allowed genealogists to search for people who shared parts of the same family line. What came back was not a name. It was a match in the range of a second cousin. That was close enough to matter, but not close enough to end the search. From there, the search moved out of the lab and into records. Volunteers built family trees, compared records, followed branches, and slowly narrowed the possibilities until Francis Wayne Alexander became the likely answer. Even then, it was not enough to simply think they had found him. Investigators still had to confirm it. They checked public records, financial records, post-mortem reports, and the few traces of Francis's life in Chicago. They found that one of his last known records was a traffic ticket in January 1976. They found little evidence of life after that. Then DNA from his mother and a half-brother helped confirm what the genealogy had pointed toward. The unidentified man from the crawl space was Francis Wayne Alexander. His family later said they could now lay to rest what happened and move forward by honoring him. The identification did not undo what happened. It did not give them the years back, but it gave them the answer they had never known how to look for. By then, 3 names had come back through the reopened effort: William George Bundy, James Haakenson, Francis Wayne Alexander. Each one changed the case in a different way, not because it changed what Gacy had done, but because it put a name back where there had only been a number. But after those 3 identifications, 5 victims were still waiting for theirs. So the story stays here for a while, with the 5 who are still unnamed. In the records, they are still known by numbers: Body 28, Body 26, Body 13, Body 21, and Body 10. Those labels are not names. They are the way investigators have had to track them for decades. Still, the files are not empty. There are estimated ages, recovery locations, possible death windows, and in some cases physical details from the lives they had before the case. But fragments are not the same as identity. Body 28 is believed to have been one of the younger, unidentified victims, possibly somewhere between 14 and 18 years old. Available estimates put his likely death earlier than some of the others, sometime before the middle of 1975. His remains were not found during the first days inside the crawl space. They were found later, in the backyard area, in March 1979. His recovery also shows that the search was bigger than the crawl space. Some of it reached into the yard. By then, investigators had already found so much under the house, and still the property had not given up everything. And with Body 28, the age estimate is one of the hardest details to hear. 14 to 18 is a wide range. He could have been young enough for school, or just beginning to be seen as a young adult. But the file cannot say which one he was. It can only place him inside a range until something more certain comes forward. Then there is Body 26. He appears to have been older than some of the others, usually estimated somewhere in his 20s. His remains were found in the crawl space, among the bodies recovered near the end of December 1978. His estimated death window falls around the summer of 1976. For Body 26, investigators have a likely age group, a place of recovery, and a rough window of time. It still does not tell us what his life looked like before he entered the case. Body 13 and Body 21 sit in that same difficult space. Both are usually described as teenagers or young men, both are connected to the crawl space, and both fall somewhere around the uncertain 1976 stretch of the case. Body 13 is often estimated as a young man in his late teens or early 20s. Body 21 is often placed somewhere from the mid-teens into the early 20s. Those estimates help investigators separate the remains and place them in the timeline, but they still stop short of identity. When there is a name, the story can move toward people who remember him. With these 5, the story keeps stopping at estimates. For Body 13 and Body 21, the numbers still do the work that names should have done. They allow investigators to separate one set of remains from another. They allow reports to be written and evidence to be tracked. But a number cannot say who they were before the crawl space or what name they answered to. Then there is Body 10. He was found in the crawl space on December 26, 1978. He is usually estimated to have been between 17 and 21 years old. His height was estimated somewhere between 5'7" and 5'11". His hair and eye color are still unknown. Even there, the information had limits. Investigators have also tried another route with some of the unidentified victims: facial reconstructions. In 2018, new images were released for 2 of them, including Body 10. Body 10 is where the files give a little more to work with, because alongside the reconstruction, there were a few physical details that survived in the file. Before his death, he had suffered an injury to his left clavicle, and that injury had healed. He also had dental fillings. Those details are small, but they matter. The file cannot say how the clavicle injury happened, but it can say he lived with it long enough for it to heal. And the dental fillings matter too. They mean he had once sat in a dentist's chair somewhere. Someone had treated him while he was alive, before he became an unidentified file. That kind of detail does not give investigators a name by itself, but it reminds you that a name existed All 5 can be tracked in the file. None of the 5 can yet be called by name. And according to Cook County, DNA profiles suitable for comparison have now been obtained from all 5, so the evidence has not disappeared. The remains hold information, the files exist, and the DNA can still be compared, but the missing piece is not only inside the case file anymore. It has to connect to someone outside the file, maybe a close relative, maybe a distant branch of a family line. Until that happens, the records can keep their numbers, their DNA, and the places where they were found, but it still cannot say who they were. From there, the case becomes less about what was found and more about what was never connected. But having those profiles is not the same as having a name. They still need someone to compare them with. That is why the sheriff's office keeps asking for living blood relatives, people who had a male relative go missing anywhere in the United States between 1970 and 1979, and who are willing to give DNA for direct comparison. By now, the answer may not be in the house at all. It may be in a family line that has never been connected to the case, and that only works if someone on the living side knows there is a question to ask. But some people are never reported missing. Cook County has said that even some of Gacy's identified victims had never been reported missing. Some relatives were estranged, others did not understand the disappearance as something police needed to investigate. That does not always mean no one cared. Sometimes the information they had did not point toward murder. A young man could leave home, move to another city, take temporary work and stop calling. People might worry, but still believe he was alive somewhere, unreachable, or gone by choice. Once that becomes the explanation, it can settle. And Chicago itself added another layer, because this was where the murders happened, but not always where the victims' lives began. It was a city people moved through. Cook County notes that Gacy was known to target bus stations and hitchhikers, which meant some victims may have been traveling or passing through. A young man in that situation might not have close relatives nearby. He might not have steady work. He might not have people around him who knew where he came from or who would know who to call if he disappeared. That kind of life can leave a thin trail, and in the 1970s, thin trails did not always cross state lines well. A report in another state might never reach Cook County. A family somewhere else might never hear about unidentified remains found in Illinois, and if no report was filed at all, there was no official trail waiting to be matched. That is how a body can be found and still stay unknown. And the longer that separation lasts, the harder it becomes to repair. Time makes the gap wider. Parents die, siblings grow old, cousins lose contact. Old addresses stop meaning anything. Paper files move from one office to another or disappear before anyone knows they might matter. And it is not only the paperwork that changes, memory changes too. A relative may remember that someone left home, but not the exact year. A story may pass down as abandonment, shame, distance, or a choice no one fully understood. After enough time, the wrong explanation can become easier to carry than no explanation at all. That is why identification is not only science. Science can help, but it still needs the human side. A blood relative willing to test, a report from another place, a name in an old document, or a family story that suddenly looks different next to the Gacy case. The past will not change. What can still change is whether one new lead reaches back far enough. It may be a DNA sample from someone who never knew they were connected to this case, or a relative remembering a young man who went to Chicago and never clearly came back, or an old absence that suddenly looks different after decades of being explained the wrong way. That is how one of these numbers could still become a name. It may happen quietly through one person who never knew they mattered to this case. And until that possibility is gone, the 5 unidentified victims are not completely beyond reach. John Wayne Gacy was executed in 1994, But the damage he caused has lingered for decades. The bodies had been found, but some identities were still out of reach. Body 28, Body 26, Body 13, Body 21, and Body 10 are still waiting on that link. Whether they will ever be connected to their real names and to the families who once knew them is still unknown. If this story stays with you, tell me what part you keep thinking about. And if this is the kind of story you want more of, stay with Dark J. For now, 5 of John Wayne Gacy's victims still have no confirmed names. That does not mean no one ever knew them. It means the case still has not found the people who can tell us who they were.